When a snooty HOA tries to bulldoze my beloved barn, I unleash my creative chaos, but can laughter truly win against their pastel tyranny? What happens when rebellion meets absurdity? The moment I saw the eviction notice, a tidal wave of disbelief crashed over me. Did Mr. Oakley really have the audacity to stand there in his tomato-red golf pants, smirking like he'd just won the neighborhood golf card game? My barn might have had a few rustic quirks, a couple of crooked shingles, and possibly one too many wood stains to be considered aesthetically pleasing by Karen's exacting standards. But an eyesore? That was rich. My hands itched to send that smug HOA henchman packing. Instead, I stood there with my coffee mug, the steam mingling with the heated waves of incredulous anger spiraling around me. Was this really the lengths they would go to in the name of community standards? I thought I'd been living in a decent neighborhood, not some dystopian saga written by entitled suburbanites obsessed with pastels. After a good 15 seconds of self-righteous muttering, I felt a spark of madness, the familiar igniter for revolution. Seriously, how dare they? I glanced towards my barn, my sanctuary, where the scent of freshly cut wood still lingered like a comforting ghost. That barn was where I crafted creations, from finely aged oak chairs to rustic picture frames that showcased my woodland adventures. And now, I was supposed to replace it with a sun-baked yoga deck designed for pouting moms to stretch their pretentiousness into downward dog? Nope, not on my watch. Instead, I imagined the glorious moat I would dig around the HOA office, a twisted little homage to the dark art of revenge. In my mind's eye, I pictured it filled with all sorts of surprises: alligators, inflatable flamingos, or perhaps Karen herself, splashing around while shouting aesthetic orders at the local wildlife. So, I called up my faithful companion in crime, Sam Rodriguez. She answered on the second ring, her voice bubbling with the hint of mischief. Knowing her, she likely had a snack ready to fuel our plan for retaliation. "Charlie, did Karen finally level up her control freak game?" she teased, and I relayed the elaborate saga of my barn eviction with the dramatic flair of a Shakespearean tragedy. "That's absurd," she roared, laughter peppering her words like confetti. "What's next? Are they going to bulldoze your house because it's not Pinterest perfect? You've got to do something about this." Her sweet encouragement ignited my motivation. "I'm planning a moat," I declared dramatically, picturing the 12-foot-wide trench I would dedicate to transcending their tyranny. Sam let out a cackle worthy of a stand-up comic. "Let's make it an exhibition, like a ticketed moat. Who doesn't want to come see a moat in the suburbs, right?" We brainstormed ideas for our moat project, each one as outlandishly absurd as the last. Maybe I'd plant flowers in the water, or fill it with koi fish painted in HOA-approved colors. Color-coded fish! How entertaining would it be to invite the very folks who took my barn away to watch their own embarrassment float by? Maybe I'd charge a small fee, because what better way to profit from their pretentiousness than through some good old-fashioned irony, right? Oh, how I could see the tension build as they gathered at the water's edge, watching the local wildlife thrive while they sulked in their pastel blazers. Of course, there was also the logistical side of things to consider, digging the moat without attracting that keen eye of pasty-white Karen. I envisioned her pristine heels sinking into the mud as she proclaimed my project illegal. But really, who cares about legality when you're on the path to epic revenge? Days turned into frenzied planning sessions, punctuated by jokes and laughter, as Sam and I gathered supplies. I secured shovels, ropes, and enough plastic flamingos to populate an aviary. My front yard had never looked more like a construction zone. Piles of dirt mimicked miniature mountains, and it was glorious. Every time an HOA member glanced my way, it gave me a thrill knowing I was pushing buttons and ruffling feathers. On a particular day, while shoveling dirt out of what would become the foundation of this moat, I was blessed with a jaw-dropping sight. Karen herself strutting along the street, flaunting her crisp blazer and clipboard as if she were a queen inspecting her not-so-great empire. Her confused expression was priceless when she spotted my excavation. I waved enthusiastically, knowing she'd be calling a meeting in no time to figure out how I managed to defy the chaotic rules of aesthetics she enforced. As shovel met dirt and laughter filled the air, I began to wonder what other wild ideas I might hatch in this glorious frenzy of rebellion. The thought of doubling the size of my moat, or turning it into a crudely constructed waterslide, haunted my dreams. The tantalizing possibility of a sunset party on the yoga deck's ashes under a full moon made me giddy. The absurdity of it all tickled me, as if fate had handed me the most ridiculous plot twist in my life saga. Just as I thought I had an ocean of plans swirling together, a thought struck me. What if they struck back? Would they try to have me arrested for environmental assault? Or some other ridiculous thing? The thought sent a bubble of laughter through me. If they were going to take my barn and build a yoga retreat, they might as well face the madness brewing right outside their pretty pastel windows. Couldn't they see? In the games of powerhouses, one does not simply bulldoze a barn without a price to pay. The stakes were officially raised, and with each shovelful of dirt, I learned that the battle for my barn had only just begun. What other crazy ideas might Sam and I come up with next? With the groundwork of my glorious moat officially underway, excitement swirled like the clouds above as Sam and I hatched new plans. The absurdity of our project seemed to know no bounds, and I was fully prepared for every laughable scenario that could emerge from our spontaneous revolt. I dredged more ideas while digging, occasionally shouting absurdities into the void, as though speaking to the naive pastels of the HOA. How about we add a zip line over the moat? I mused, grinning at the thought of homeowners getting doused in mud while screaming uncontrollably. I could practically hear Karen now, berating the sky as her prenatally curated hair was flattened beneath the weight of her own bewilderment. Surely no one could withstand that level of chaos, my personal vendetta leaving gaping holes in her preposterous aesthetic order. Amidst my daydreams, the moat evolved beyond a mere trench. It became an epic saga filled with wild ideas. What if I crafted a small pirate ship for the middle of the moat, sternly waving a flag with the words, "No HOA allowed"? Sam laughed until she nearly dropped her shovel, insisting that I design a tiny, haunting skeleton captain who could scare the HOA rubber-stamping crew away. It was astonishing how a little rebellion could morph into an entire fantasy of absurdity, a watery Disneyland of chaos right at our fingertips. Yet, as with any grand endeavor, I knew I had to consider the consequences. An epiphany struck me while plotting my pirate vessel. Maybe we needed more than just a moat. Perhaps we should stage an HOA infiltration. If they thought they could waltz in and take my barn away, then what better way to strike back than to turn their own community zen moment into a preview of my whimsical artistry? With this new concept simmering in the back of my mind, my first task was to execute the perfect diversion technique. My eyes widened as I imagined Sam and I dressed in ridiculously exaggerated yoga outfits, complete with leg warmers and headbands tighter than Karen's grip on her clipboard. We'd infiltrate that pastel haven with the audacity to challenge their oh-so-serious meditation with our raucous laughter and chanting of ridiculous slogans like "Downward Dog or Die." Sam was already over the moon with ideas, providing delightful commentary as we plotted under the glorious shade of my remaining trees. How deliciously ironic it would be to teach yoga at the very spot that replaced my artistic sanctuary. It filled me with a renewed vigor. The HOA overlooked one significant detail. They were dealing with a creative mind, and my trusty co-conspirator. Soon enough, the day of the infamous community zen moment arrived, and I felt electric with excitement. The neighborhood was abuzz, as residents rolled out their yoga mats along the freshly constructed deck. It was a scene both absurd and serene. My heart raced with mischief as I donned my most disastrous and outrageous yoga attire, which involved a neon green leotard that gleamed in the sunlight while paired with polka dot leggings. Sam arrived wearing an astronaut costume. "Ready to make some waves, Captain?" she quipped, adjusting her helmet. I nearly rolled into the grass laughing. Who knew that one day I would see my barn's legacy turned into an event dedicated to aesthetic sorcery? It felt so gloriously poetic, the linear lines and peaceful symmetry of the HOA about to be swirled into beautifully chaotic oblivion. When we arrived at the yoga deck, the interaction was almost as surreal as I had hoped. I pretended to stretch exaggeratedly, while haphazardly tossing inflatable flamingos into the crowd when no one was watching. Tension crackled as Karen approached, her eyes narrowing like the powerful gaze of a hawk spotting its prey. "Charlie, what on earth are you wearing?" she stammered, her composure slipping slightly. I flashed her a big, exaggerated smile, one that said, "Welcome to the greatest show on turf." In that moment, I realized how satisfying it was to drown the look of superiority on her face with a giant splash of chaos. Giggling onlookers noticed the ridiculousness of it all. I could feel my revenge brewing amidst their confounded expressions, each inflatable flamingo punctuating the glorious absurdity of my stance against their rules. As the gathering kicked into gear, I made a dramatic move, yelling, "Remember, folks, yoga is not just a practice but a way of life, especially when thwarting closing of creativity." I leapt onto the deck and made exaggerated poses while shouting yoga manifestations that tangled reality and affirmation into one deliciously hilarious disaster. It was a neighborly rebellion of epic proportions. My face broke into a broad grin while I struck an outrageous pose that was more suited for a circus performer than a yoga class. The disapproval from other attendees was drowned out in waves of laughter, and I could feel the flipping of not just yoga mats but of opinions taking a turn. With every pose, I'd planted seeds of absurdity deep in their pristine perceptions. Was it possible they'd reconsider their HOA monstrosities after today? Perhaps all it really took was a little chaos to remind them that life wasn't about pastels but color, and that we could paint a narrative of our own. Fueled by empowerment and laughter, I couldn't help but wonder what wild mess would come next on this path of hilarious rebellion. What if we turned the entire neighborhood into a canvas of chaos? Would my surreal antics ever persuade Karen to relinquish her iron grip on her pastel regime? It seemed ludicrous to think so, but how exhilarating to challenge the status quo. I could feel the creative ideas bubbling inside me like a fire. Who knew how far a little humor and rebellion could stretch? For now, as I engaged in this delightful dance of chaos, all I knew for certain was that the tide was turning, and as long as we stood together in laughter and absurdity, the HOA would never truly tame our spirits. In the midst of my hilarious yoga rebellion, an idea struck me like a lightning bolt of lunacy. It was time for the grand finale. If my inflatable flamingos had served to bewilder and entertain, then surely an even grander spectacle would seal the deal and carve this day into the annals of HOA history. As chaos reigned around me, I envisioned the pièce de résistance of my retaliatory extravaganza, a giant inflatable unicorn. Yes, a magnificent sparkly unicorn, its colors gleaming like a rainbow after a particularly dramatic rainstorm, would be the climax of my watery revolt. I could just picture Karen's face as she jabbed a manicured finger at this absurd creature of fantasy, her brows knitting together with outrage, while the rest of the neighborhood erupted in laughter. Oh, the thought alone left me giggling like a child who'd just stolen the last cookie from the jar. So, fueled by adrenaline, I sprinted over to my trusty fellow co-conspirator Sam, who was right in the middle of executing a not-so-graceful downward dog. "Forget just the flamingos, Sam, we need a unicorn!" I exclaimed, barely able to contain my manic enthusiasm. Her eyes sparkled with mischief at the thought, and she sat up abruptly, her messy bun wobbling in excitement. "A unicorn? That's brilliant," she replied, her excitement bubbling over. In no time at all, and with the kind of urgency usually reserved for fire drills, we dashed to the nearest party supplies store. We raced through aisles while dodging confused customers, our mission clear: gather every unicorn-related accessory we could find. Streamers, glitter, and balloons, decorated with rainbows, flooded our arms as we piled our loot into a cart that had all the elegance of a shopping journey gone rogue. Back at the yoga deck, the atmosphere had transformed into a cacophony of tranquility, interrupted by head-scratching amusement. Neighbors were trying to maintain their meditative states while side-eyeing my neon attire and Sam's space-inspired ensemble. Oh, how I loved it! I could hardly control my laughter as I envisioned their glances turning from skeptical to outright bewildered. As I and my partner in crime set up our inflatable unicorn, a gentle breeze blew through, making its pastel exterior sway softly. It was mesmerizing, capturing both the essence of whimsy and a certain mockery of the strictly regulated neighborhood decorum meant to suffocate creativity. I threw my arms wide, proclaiming, "Behold the spirit of freedom," as I pointed to our majestic creation. And lo and behold, we had a crowd, a semi-captive audience drawn in by the absurdity unfolding before them. Like moths to a shimmering flame, folks had begun to venture closer, tipping the balance of decorum toward the unpredictable. Laughter rippled through the air like a tidal wave as I bounced around in front of our ridiculous installation, waxing poetic about the virtues of creative chaos, all while doing the most exaggerated interpretive dance that would make any random passerby question my sanity. This, my friends, is what happens when the spirit of creativity is stifled by the rigid shackles of HOA bylaws, I shouted, elegant as a skewed yoga instructor on a sugar high. Noticing more people were gathering, I seized the moment and invited everyone to participate in a group pose right in front of our inflatable spectacle, where trepidation melted into sheer joy. Naturally, this led to prolonged fits of laughter as we struck increasingly ridiculous poses, creating a tapestry of hilarity woven into every photo snapped by onlookers. Amidst the madness, I even noticed the flicker of surprise on Karen's tight-lipped face as she gawked at our grassroots revolution. The serious president of the HOA was visibly reeling, her arms crossed defensively as if trying to tame an outbreak of wildfire with sheer willpower. Sam, Ever the opportunist whispered in my ear, "You think she'll call the authorities on us?" "Excuse me, officer, there's a unicorn uprising on the yoga deck." We doubled over, howling in laughter at the sheer absurdity of it all. Little did they know, rebellion had never looked so flamboyant. As our yoga mob continued, I pulled out a glittery sign made from the cardinal sin of HOA-approved decorations: creativity over conformity. It was adorned with all the finesse of a craft project gone wild, but it looked brilliant against our gaudy backdrop of inflatable chaos. To my glee, more and more neighbors were abandoning their mats, joining our makeshift rebels coalition without fully realizing the extent of our mischief. I could sense Karen stewing, but beneath her poised veneer, I detected an undeniable glimmer of doubt creeping into her authoritarian glare. Could it be, just maybe, I was cracking the hard shell of her pastel empire? Might laughter be contagious enough to transform those strict lines into curves of creativity? But as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting fading warm hues of rebellion over the deck, the moment carried a peculiar weight. Was this the turning point? The delightful madness of our so-called yoga deck alliance had midwifed a newfound hope, challenging the very essence of the HOA's ironclad grip. Maybe today wasn't just about injury to my artistic endeavors, but a testament to the power of community spirit and camaraderie. Could we, through our pop of color and chaos, inspire a reawakening within our neighbors? As fireworks of laughter filled the air, I couldn't help but dream. What more ridiculous joys could sprout from these against the grain shenanigans? The absurdity of it all stirred a hopeful energy within me, fueling dreams of rebellion for days to come. As the sun rose, casting a golden glow over the yoga deck, I could almost hear the dramatic orchestral music crescendoing in my mind. The inflatable unicorn towered above us like a flamboyant soldier guarding the fortress of creativity, while Sam and I splashed about in front of our newfound follower. The anarchy of our rebellion had succeeded beyond my wildest dreams. The energy in the air crackled with excitement and laughter, and even the rigid neighbors were finally loosing up. If we can turn this wholesome yoga session into a full-blown festival of absurdity, I thought gleefully, what else might we accomplish? Just as I was pondering a flash mob routine set against the backdrop of my barn's ashes, I spotted Karen striding toward us, her pastel blazer flapping like the wings of an angry duck. Karen's expression was one of pure incredulity, paired with a hearty dose of barely contained fury. It was the kind of look that could shatter glass. Forget the towering unicorn. She was the real showstopper. "Charlie, what on earth do you think you're doing?" she boomed, her voice slicing through our joyous chant of downward-facing unicorn. Her tone was spectacularly disapproving, like a mother catching her child with a paint-covered paw after a failed art project gone awry. I couldn't help but relish in the moment. This was my masterpiece, and she was merely the consequence of my bold, lovable rebellion. With a grin plastered on my face, I took a few exaggerated prancing steps toward her, fully embracing my role as the witty grasshopper to her relentless cicada. "Oh, Karen," I said with mock sincerity, doing my best impression of a yoga instructor. "We are merely engendering creativity to flow like a soft breeze amongst the rigid straight lines of your bylaws." I gestured toward the gathering crowd, their eyes dancing with glee. "Look, we've awakened the spirit of fun in our community, and the universe clearly wants us to express ourselves, unicorn style." And if that wasn't enough, I pulled out my glittery sign, waving it triumphantly like some misguided knight of whimsical justice. The giggles erupted, and I could see Karen's meticulously styled hair twitching slightly, as if it were alive and disapproving of my nonsense. But rather than retreating, Karen's gaze deepened with focus, her nostrils flaring dangerously. "You think you can distract us with a silly inflatable? You're undermining our community, Charlie," she admonished, using my name as if it were an insult rather than an essential thread of my identity. I chuckled, imagining her clutching her pearls while I entertained my own brand of comedic chaos. "Oh, Karen, you've got it all wrong. I'm just trying to ensure we live life like a yoga retreat instead of a lifeless community. After all, life's too short to be bashed with bylaws and submerged in monotony, right?" Each word was like a strategic thrust, pushing her further away from her oh-so-serious demeanor. Sam sidled next to me, and together we shot exaggerated winks at the assembled crowd, buoyed by our defiance. Caught off guard, Karen hesitated, a crack in her porcelain facade. Realizing I had the upper hand, I turned the ridicule up a notch. "Isn't yoga all about the freedom of expression? I guess that doesn't include inflatable unicorns under HOA regulations." I threw my arms over my head in a pose that looked all too resembling of someone attempting a very awkward tree pose, sprightly and on the verge of tumbling over, but somehow resolutely claiming existence in vibrant colors. Cheering laughter burst from the depths of our audience like a fireworks celebration. The juxtaposition of their delight against Karen's pinned-back perfection was almost too mesmerizing to be real. I could see that incredulity twisting her features, rivaling only my own amusement. Just then, an unexpected twist occurred. Billy, yes, the original yoga instructor floundering in his newfound role of referee, broke free and trotted over, laughter dancing in his blue eyes. "Come on, Karen! You've got to admit this is fabulous!" he chimed in, waving an arm at the surreal carnival theme now drenching the wholesome endeavor. "Why don't we embrace this chaos and add some sort of happiness hour?" It felt like a team-building exercise for whimsical revolutionaries, and I fought the urge to hug him for his brave support. Would the tyrant finally crack? In that moment of collective camaraderie, I sensed hope swirling through the air like sparkles of pixie dust. Laughter beamed across the group, uniting them even as the facade of conformity began to fade. Karen's eyes narrowed, though. Her attempts at control were clearly slipping through her fingers like sand, yet the ridiculousness gathered momentum. "All right," she spat, her voice dripping with restraint. "This is not over. We shall have an HOA meeting to discuss the future of this nonsense." Cries of discontent drowned out her proclamation, yet I couldn't help but feel as victorious as David facing Goliath. As the sun finally dipped below the horizon, our laughter echoed in the twilight, mingling with the light that began to coat the inflatable unicorn in hues of absurdity and rebellion. What lay ahead in the murky waters of this HOA battle was uncertain. Yet as I twirled, basking in the laughter and newfound connection, a wild thought crossed my mind. Could we actually dethrone this pastel tyrant? Perhaps instead of surrendering to rules, we could inspire a full-blown lifestyle revolution, one inflatable spectacle at a time. As rays of renewed purpose coursed through me, I couldn't help but smile. How wonderfully ridiculous was this journey? Would my barn be the only collateral beauty caught in this whimsical showdown? The waves of discontent coursed through the remaining members of the HOA like a shockwave, leaving Karen floundering amidst the ruins of her credibility. I couldn't help but observe the precarious balance of power shift, each playful laugh igniting the embers of rebellion deep within me. As the crowd cheered and rallied around our levity, I decided right then I needed to double down on this momentum. "All right, folks, let's make this official," I declared, climbing atop an overturned crate that someone had sneakily brought in. "I hereby propose a new community slogan, inflatable fun for all." My words rolled off the tongue like a sweet caramel-coated candy, and I could feel the hype grow. The crowd erupted, ready to declare their newfound joy, potential yoga enthusiasm spilling into every corner like confetti at a much-maligned birthday party thrown by a 5-year-old. However, Karen was not about to let this impromptu carnival overshadow her authority. With each moment that passed, I watched her expression harden into something more akin to a storm cloud brewing ominously in the distance. "Do you really think this is how communities function, Charlie?" she shot back, her voice laced with indignation, as though being covered by an invisible layer of irate wasp venom. "What you're doing is a dangerous precedent. If everyone starts doing whatever they want, our HOA will fall into chaos. What's next? A petting zoo with goats grazing on everyone's lawns?" I chuckled at the absurdity of it all, picturing tiny goats frolicking amidst pastel garden gnomes, which only fueled the comedic energy of our avian-themed gathering. If goats were the precipice of her hysteria, I should have been honored. As if fueled by the momentum from the clownishly chaotic uprise, my inner prankster challenged me to escalate things even further. "Goats, you say?" I replied, raising an eyebrow while positioning myself dramatically like a seasoned actor about to deliver a profound monologue. "Well, you must know that goats are the very embodiment of community spirit. Just look at how they live carefree lives, munching grass and stealing snacks." I motioned towards Sam, who stood poised with a glittering water balloon in hand. "If they can teach us to leaven our struggles with joy, why then we should take a page out of their book." I felt a rush surge through my body, the kind of irrational excitement that evoked visions of cannons made out of kiddie pools. If the HOA was bent on bulldozing my barn for a yoga deck, I could surely retaliate with a weapon of delight no yoga instructor could hope to match: whimsical creativity. Sam joined the fray, her laughter intertwining with mine as she chimed into the absurdity of the moment. "And while we're at it, let's incorporate synchronized goat yoga into our monthly schedules, Karen. Just think, a true blend of relaxation and chaos, specially made for the spirit of the community. We'll call it Zen and Goats." The crowd erupted once more into raucous laughter, fanning the flames of revolt. If there were any goats, I mentally noted, They'd need to be outfitted in tiny yoga mats and accessories. Each word was a mischievous shot at the delicate bubble of Karen's sterile universe of pastel perfection, a universe that I was more than willing to tear asunder with my relentless zeal. I had a renewed sense of purpose, and I could see the fissures in Karen's armor widen further with each joke we spun. As twilight deepened, the atmosphere shimmered with spontaneity and joy, transforming my backyard into a splendid circus of creativity. I felt an irresistible surge of crafty determination waft over me, and the wheels in my mind began to turn furiously. "Let's dig a moat," I bellowed, the idea bursting forward unannounced. The crowd quieted, stunned by the lunacy of my suggestion, while Karen raised an eyebrow in disbelief. "We shall contrive a shimmering moat right around that cold, unyielding HOA office." Cheers erupted as my fellow comrades joined in rallying for this riotous idea. With scattered cheers of "Moat Party," affirming my spontaneous creativity, I could see the gusts of impending change swell through the crowd. This wasn't merely a revolt. It was the dawn of a glorious movement, one that could only be held aloft by a chaotic standoff between goats, inflatable unicorns, and my freshly conceived moat. Karen glared at me as if a mythical creature had arisen before her, powerlessly grappling with a swarm of absurdity. "You can't just dig a moat, Charlie. That's illegal, and you've crossed a line," she exclaimed, her voice shaky, desperate to regain her semblance of authority. I could feel the energy surge through the crowd, like rocket fuel propelling 1,000 unmanageable ideas into the night. The idea of a moat, once an impulsive spur-of-the-moment thought, suddenly morphed into something that felt both liberating and thrillingly tantalizing. Imagining it adorned with faux lily pads and tiny inflatable flamingos made my heart skip a beat. If I could construct that moat and proclaim it a fortress, standing proudly between my dreams and Karen's contractual tyrannies, the laughable absurdities of our escalating battle would reach a crescendo that even she couldn't ignore. "Oh, Karen, my dear pastel-suited nemesis of discontent," I bantered in mock reverence, resisting the urge to bow theatrically. "The satisfaction of constructing our rebellious moat will surely trump any legal penalties. After all, we must embrace the folly of joy over the drudgery of conformity. What could possibly be more enriching for this neighborhood than quirky, joyful defiance? Imagine the postcards." My heart raced as I readied my vision for this grand revolt. The connection to my barn that had once housed my creativity was now tangible once more. It beckoned me to build a bridge, or perhaps a moat, between the absurdity and joy that had once turned my life upside down. Would an inflatable fortress mark the turning point in our battle, sending the HOA retreating in the face of goofy camaraderie? I could sense the collective excitement reach a fever pitch, and I shared conspiratorial glances with Sam, our eyes alight with the thrill of rebellion. In a spectacular twist, perhaps this could unite us all, neighbors and foes alike, against the creeping encroachment of Karen's dreary regulations. And for the first time, I felt the tides shifting once again. There was a spark of hope amidst our laughter, a sense of empowerment that defied the absurdity she sought to impose. It was the glimmer of liberation that swelled within me, urging me forward as we prepared to face this moment with creativity as our shield. We would dig that moat, and with it, we would not just reclaim our community but our very spirit. Was this the beginning of sowing seeds of joyful chaos, or merely a transitional tide in our whimsical revolution? The anticipation hanging in the air was electrifying, each neighbor's face lighting up with mischief-fueled excitement. I felt like a maestro orchestrating a symphony of rebellion, waving my hands as if conducting a wild performance under a circus tent. The idea of having a moat around the HOA office didn't just symbolize defiance, it was a canvas for creativity itself, a mischievous art form I was ready to embrace. With a swift glance over the crowd, I could see Sam grinning widely, holding a shovel like it was an Olympic torch that signified the beginning of our revolution. "Let's get to work!" I shouted, the adrenaline pumping through my veins like a roller coaster launch just before the first drop. As we set to work, we exuded more enthusiasm than a bunch of sugar-crazed kids on a playground, and what came next felt utterly surreal. Neighbors grabbed shovels, buckets, and wheelbarrows from wherever they could find them, tripping over each other in their glee. I half expected someone to show up with a clown wig and honking horn to escalate the absurdity further, but there was something electric about this moment. "Quick! We're digging the moat to keep out unwelcome yoga practitioners!" I yelled, trying to coax out louder cheers. The chants of "Moat! Moat! Moat!" echoed down the street, and I swear I could hear the plants swaying in unison, caught up in our moment of wild revelry. Karen, witnessing her pristine authority slowly being burrowed into the earth, attempted to rally her supporters. "This is ridiculous. You're causing a disturbance," she shrieked, her voice cracking like an old record stuck in a groove. A handful of her devoted followers, however, couldn't resist the buoyancy of our merriment. Karen's expression contorted into disbelief as she glared at her rebellious neighbors who were now exchanging shovels for oversized beach toys, as if preparing for a championship game of amateur moat building. Our makeshift moat took on a life of its own. It was transforming from an ordinary body of water into a whimsical wonderland that even Hans Christian Andersen would have marveled at. As the sun dipped lower, casting golden rays that twinkled off the freshly dug earth, we shaped our moat with all the care and exuberance of toddlers making a sandcastle at the beach. I slung my shovel over my shoulder and looked around, picturing flamingos bobbing in the water while inflatable unicorns drifted by like majestic sea creatures. "What about snack stands?" I hollered, trying to stoke the fires of creativity even further. "We can set up a hot dog haystack express right here at our brand new moat. Think about it. Buns in one hand and a moat in the other. This is peak community living, folks." Laughter erupted, and even some of Karen's staunch allies struggled to suppress snickers. Maybe the HOA wouldn't be an endless source of my irritation after all. "Trust me, Karen, you might want to reconsider your war against joy," I half joked, half proclaimed, aiming my quippy line straight at the heart of her pastel fortress. The once expressive authority figure now looked as though she was trying to deflect tornadoes with her hand. She couldn't help but be outmatched by the infectious positivity swirling through the neighborhood like a cooking pot bubbling over. Even a couple of teenagers on skateboards wheeled by, giving hearty thumbs up, as if declaring that the moat was the newest local cool spot. In that moment, laughter became a battle cry, transforming our mission from an act of retaliation into a stand for community spirit. At long last, we crafted a glorious moat, our symbolic fortress, with the kind of joy that could light up the hottest summer days. I stepped back, surveying our handiwork and marveling at what had begun as a small act of defiance evolving into a full-blown neighborhood extravaganza. The sight of our splish-splash moat warmed my heart, illuminating the dark corners where HOA dread had taken root. When I spread my arms wide in a theatrical pose and announced, "Welcome to the Moat of Freedom. All who wish to swim in the waters of creativity are welcome." Even Karen sighed deeply, perhaps wondering if she'd inadvertently stepped onto an entirely different plane of reality. Just as we were about to toast our achievement with imaginary sparkling juice, something miraculous happened. We heard laughter from the inside of the HOA office. Was it possible? Could Karen have cracked a smile, or was I merely imagining a cartoonish thought bubble hovering above her head? But no, that noise gathered steam, rolling out like a wave of enthusiasm and catching the attention of the curmudgeonly members still holed up inside. Suddenly, shouting arrangements echoed from the office as they realized their landscape, once a rigid symbol of conformity, had been invaded by our whimsy and levity. "Are you folks really going to just watch?" I taunted, flicking a drop of faux water, reminiscent of the mighty moat in front of us. It felt surreal, standing amidst the chatter and mirth, watching the corners of Karen's mouth twitch ever so slightly upwards. Maybe, just maybe, we were witnessing the birth of a new type of relationship involving laughter-hugging statutes and community standards. My heart raced with possibilities. Perhaps enchantment was the medium through which harmony could be forged. With a triumphant roar, I aimed my shovel in an exaggerated motion, rallying my neighbor comrades as I chanted, "Moat, moat, moat." Chants turned into joyful celebrations, transforming the prospect of yoga on a yoga deck into wishful fantasies where creativity and fun ran rampant. Who would have thought a barn bulldozing episode would lead to such freedom and camaraderie? Who would have thought that the absurd could become our rebellious unity? But just as we were ready to declare victory and turn our newfound moat into the community's premier party spot, a voice piped up from the crowd, "What's next, Charlie? Unicorn rides?" The laughter surged again like a warm wave, and I grinned at the whimsical challenge, considering how a full-scale horses and hot air balloons festival would suit our unruly community. Would this be the spark for a new chapter in our grotesquely fun neighborhood story? With ideas swirling, and the community leaning toward this delightful absurdity, I could hardly contain my excitement. What could possibly come next in this uproarious saga where creativity swam with an inflatable unicorn in our new moat of opportunity? As laughter erupted like fireworks on the 4th of July, I realized that our little rebellion had sparked something greater than just a moat. We were breathing life into the very fabric of our community, What had started as a mission to reclaim my bulldozed barn now felt like a movement, a dynamic uprising against the mundane tyranny of compliance. With each shovel of dirt turned, we pulled the imaginary weeds of entitlement right out from under Karen's pastel authority. The jubilant chants of Moat, Moat, Moat reverberated through the evening air, as if we were summoning the spirits of freedom to dance in tandem with our new reality. Suddenly, we were not just neighbors, we were the architects of something extraordinary, a neighborhood renaissance led by absurdity and laughter. In that spirited atmosphere, I glanced around, and there was Sam, her eyes twinkling with mischief, practically vibrating with ideas. "Okay, Charlie, seriously, what's next? A moat wrestling tournament?" she teased, making exaggerated gestures of two behemoths grappling over the inflatable unicorn. It was audaciously ridiculous, yet captivating. As if struck by lightning, I could see it. A summer fair culminating in the most eclectic, utterly unorthodox event imaginable, blending the absurdity of backyard wrestling with the chill vibes of a community cook-off. Forget the yoga deck, Sam. Let's reclaim weekends with Moat Wrestling Federation meets cookout extravaganza. My excitement surged, fueled by the shared enthusiasm of those around. It was a vortex of creativity, and we were just getting warmed up. The very thought of swathes of neighbors engulfed in a hilarious spectacle of grappling, strategic hot dog hoarding, and spontaneous water balloon battles made my heart pound with thrill. We could form teams with snazzy names, like the Gutter Guardians and the Soggy Bottoms. As ideas collided, a new game plan formed. We'd run creative workshops, art contests involving the moat, maybe even yoga sessions focused on finding inner peace while floating on pool noodles. "Karen won't know what hit her," I shouted, mimicking a superhero landing pose. Cheers erupted anew, echoing through the vested depths of our transformed community, overshadowing any sense of fear that the HOA could muster up. WHO needed a pristine yoga deck when you could have a moat of opportunity where laughter ruled supreme. Meanwhile, I caught a glimpse of Karen peering at us from an office window, her forehead knitted in a perplexed frown. There she stood, the woman who had unleashed the bulldozers. Now, she felt the distant tremors of a motley rebellion taking shape right under her perfect pastel nose. It was as if someone had poured colorful glitter into a fault line. Her once sterile domain was now being stained by giggles and camaraderie. Just then, I leaned over and cupped my hands beside my mouth like an overambitious announcer. "Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the inaugural Moat Wrestling event. Let's make sure that future HOA meetings involve more than just regulations. Bring on the snacks, the shenanigans, and the occasional splash fight." For a fleeting moment, Karen's intense gaze flickered with what I could have sworn was admiration. Or maybe it was horror? Regardless, it didn't deter my spirit. Instead, it ignited an inner fire. If her trajectory had set out to be the lifeguard of conformity, she was now about to be swept into our joyous tide of absurdity. "What's the matter, Karen? Scared of a little friendly competition?" I quipped, hoping to weave humor into her tightly constructed world of straight lines and strict rules. The crowd erupted in gleeful shouts, demanding her participation, pleading for her to join the fun. We were transforming the HOA saga, using laughter to craft a narrative that blurred the lines between adversary and ally. As twilight cloaked the neighborhood in a silvery embrace, the moat shimmered with the possibilities we'd created. With a final flourish, I looked around at my merry band of rebels, with sturdy boots planted firmly in their own ground and mischievous glints in their eyes, and clapped my hands to orchestrate one last cheer. "Tomorrow morning we gather at the break of dawn. Let's challenge every absurd HOA rule with creativity, humor, and, our new moat. The reign of conformity shall not endure." Everyone erupted into madness, clinking our imaginary cups of victory, bonding over the spectacle of community that had somehow been aching to flourish beneath regulation after regulation. "After all," I added with a wink, "life is too short to take your community meetings too seriously." Underneath those twinkling stars and the shared laughter among true friends, I knew we had birthed something magical. This wasn't about being the enforcers of protocol anymore. This was motioning toward a future rife with laughter and whimsy, one where freedom flowed as freely as our newly established moat. Convincing everyone to embrace the absurdity and fight for their own spaces, I turned to them, ignited by our newfound purpose, and proclaimed, "Fight for your space. Share your tales of absurdity." It seemed so simple, yet held the power of reimagining relationships and rebelling against the takeover of conformity. Right then, I knew we'd transformed the future of our neighborhood, for better or for whimsical.